เซสชันต่อไป Ark Protocol Reimagining Bitcoin Layer 2 Landscape ขอเสียงปรบมือต้อนรับนิว Woodfine ด้วยครับ
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Neil, and I'm CMO at a new company called Second. So we haven't actually announced our launch yet. So you're all very lucky. You're getting a sneak peek at our company and our branding. There should be some news on that front very soon. I was hoping it was going to be before the conference, but now it's going to be after the conference. Just a little bit of a background on me. So I've been working in the Bitcoin industry for about a decade now. I've worked at a number of different startups. Starting at OKX, later going to Blockstream, then Unchained, and actually my last startup went through the same Wolf accelerator as LNFi. We went through Wolf as well, yeah. So a New York-based accelerator. Unfortunately, that startup is a part-time project right now. So now I'm working at Second, brand new company, and we're working on the Ark Protocol. I'm kind of curious what the audience is like. How many people are familiar with the Ark Protocol? Let's say like how it works, that kind of thing. Okay, perfect. Okay, great. So on the website, I'm down as an Ark developer, or at least I was last week until I got it corrected. I'm not an Ark developer. I'm a marketing guy. So this is going to be a very high-level explanation of the Ark Protocol. If you have deep technical questions, please save them for my colleagues. I won't be able to answer them, unfortunately. Also, this is the first time I've given this presentation, so I might get a few things wrong. Don't hold it against me. Okay. So first question is, do we even need a new scaling protocol? Right now, Lightning is totally awesome. It's got all of the momentum in the developer space. It's about the scaling solution that most users are using. It's really, really going fast, doing really well. But from our point of view, Lightning is really starting to show some growing pains. So there's two categories of people that are interacting with the Lightning network now. One is developers, and the other one is users. How many people have tried to build a Lightning integration here? Just curious. Anybody tried? Yeah, not many people anyway. Okay. For the people that have tried to build Lightning integrations, I speak to a lot of developers. They're having a really hard time. It's a very complex technology to integrate with. There's a lot of edge cases. There's multiple different implementations to being compatible with. There's a lot of like bugs in the system, basically. So it's very complex to integrate with. And then for the users, they unfortunately have to deal with a lot of complex channel management, liquidity management, and then if they want to remain self-sovereign, they have to run a node, which also means they need to run a Bitcoin node, and it's quite a big burden for your average consumer. And part of the reason for this is because Lightning was always designed for a purely peer-to-peer system. So it was designed for everybody to be connected to multiple different peers, and for any payment to go through multiple different hops to the destination, a web of channels, gossip protocol, all of that complexity. But actually, because of the challenges that I described earlier, the model we're starting to move towards is this hub and spoke model, where you have Lightning service providers, LSPs, as these hubs that all of the users connect to, and then the Lightning service providers connect to each other. Yeah, if we're settling on these hub and spoke models, we have to ask the question, do we need all of that complexity that the Lightning network comes with, and are we giving ourselves a hard time? So this was the question that motivated the design of the Ark Protocol. It's like, what kind of system can we design if we're like, okay, we're going to go hub and spoke, that's fine, but we want to retain self-custody for the user. We want to make sure that they're self-sovereign. What kind of thing can we design? So like eCash, Ark is a server-client model. So if you're running a wallet on your phone or on your laptop, you just connect to the server, and everybody makes transactions within that server. And this server is called an Ark service provider, so a little bit like a Lightning service provider, but I'm probably going to call it an Ark multiple times today, so that's okay too. But so unlike eCash, the server client models like eCash, but unlike eCash, Ark allows you to retain self-custody of your funds. And it uses something called virtual UTXOs, which we call VTXOs. And these VTXOs allow you at any time to recover your funds on-chain if you want to exit the Ark. You don't need any permission. You can do it completely unilaterally. We're going to go into the details of that in a bit. The transactions are all performed off-chain within the Ark server. That means you're getting low fees and also instant delivery rather than having to wait for blockchain confirmations. And unlike Lightning, there's no channels. So if you're onboarding a user, they don't need to pay an on-chain transaction fee to start using the platform. They can just set up a wallet and immediately start receiving VTXOs and immediately start becoming a self-custodial, self-sovereign user. So yeah, it's just a little bit of an easier experience for that onboarding of the first user. And you can start making transactions of any size because you can onboard any size UTXO on there. And then Ark also supports Lightning. So you can still make Lightning payments and interact with this very large Lightning network now. You can still make payments to Lightning invoices, Lightning addresses, that kind of thing. Essentially, the ASP, the Ark, becomes your Lightning service provider, or maybe the wrong term, but it becomes your gateway to the Lightning network. So you could set up an Ark wallet, maintain an Ark balance, and still make payments to the Lightning network. And not just to other Lightning wallets, you could even make payments to other Arks, to eCash mints, and all of that would be handled using Lightning. So this is a very grossly oversimplified comparison of the various different scaling solutions. So when we're scaling Bitcoin, we're looking to make fast and cheap transactions. We also want to try and achieve exponential scaling instead of linear scaling. We want to make sure we can onboard millions of users all of a sudden. And ideally, we want to avoid the end user having to deal with liquidity management. And also, we want to make sure that they're retaining control of their coins, retaining control of their keys. So Lightning, we can see why it's doing so well there. It's only failing on the liquidity management side. That's getting better now, but still a bit of a pain point. eCash, unfortunately, doesn't allow users to retain custody of their funds. And then Liquid, there's a few half things in there. I used to work at Blockstream, so I'm completely biased. But yeah, for low-cost transactions, it's cheap now, but maybe not in the future because it only offers linear scaling. It doesn't allow us to achieve that exponential scaling. And then finally, for the self-custodial, I think it's better than eCash because you've got the federation, but still some trade-offs there. And then finally, we've got Ark. And with Ark, essentially, it gives you everything. It ticks all of the boxes. You get your fast and cheap transactions. We can scale exponentially, and also you can retain self-custody. There are some caveats. There's some trade-offs. I don't want to oversell this. We're going to talk about them in a second. So we're going to talk about how it works. I'm not going to be able to get too technical, but here we go. So I think it's probably best to start from the top. How do we get funds into an Ark? And essentially that's called onboarding. And to do that, the user has to interact with the Ark server and construct a transaction. So there's a little bit of an interaction there with the Ark. They construct a transaction, you get an address from that, and then the user sends funds to that address atomically. So there's no kind of risk here. Atomically, in exchange for that deposit, the user receives VTXOs in exchange. And the VTXOs are for the same amount that they deposited into the system. And then once they've received that VTXO, they can start transacting with any other Ark users in there in a similar way that you would spend UTXOs in the Bitcoin system, except it's all handled offline. And so I think the next question a lot of people have is like, how do these VTXOs ensure that I have self-custody of my funds? And the way that happens, this is getting quite deep here, but like just a high-level overview. The VTXO that you have is bundled with everybody else's VTXOs into a transaction tree, which looks a little bit like this. And so each person at the end of the tree individually holds a bit of funds, but all of these VTXOs packaged together and then written to the Bitcoin blockchain as one large UTXO. So each level of this tree is essentially an N of N multisig, a multisig, which ensures that unless I agree, my funds can't go anywhere else. Nobody can change the structure of this tree without my permission. So you get this like very kind of good, trustless reassurance. And then periodically, every round. So for us, we're expecting it to be around 15 minutes to an hour for every round. The transactions, this round transaction will be committed to the Bitcoin blockchain. And this round time, like I think there's going to be multiple different arcs playing with different times. We don't know exactly how long that's going to be, but essentially every few minutes, every few hours, that transaction tree will be committed to the Bitcoin blockchain. And so once that's committed to the Bitcoin blockchain, in an emergency, so this is like really like something terrible has gone wrong, the Ark is not cooperating or the Ark has gone offline, you as a user can unilaterally exit. And by unilateral exit, that means you don't have to ask for any permission, you can just choose to withdraw your funds from the Ark. And the way that works is that your VTXO is at the tip of the chain. You just have to broadcast all of the transactions that get you to the tip of your chain. And these earlier transactions are basically like higher branches for the other users' VTXOs, and they retain the structure of the tree. So by you making that transaction, that doesn't prevent any other user from also accessing their funds if required. But there is some caveats. So unilateral exit, if you do one of these transactions, it can be quite expensive because you're having to broadcast so much data to the Bitcoin blockchain. And then the second caveat, which this is really interacts with, is that if you have a very small balance on the Ark and the transaction fee is more than your balance, then it doesn't make sense to make that transaction. So you only get that unilateral exit property, that reassurance, if your balance is over whatever the kind of average transaction fee on Bitcoin is right now. But the good thing is, most of the time, usually, you don't need to do a unilateral exit. That's only for emergencies. Outside of an emergency, it's very easy to just offboard, basically take your Bitcoin from the Ark by signing a forfeit transaction to the ASP, which allows them to recover your funds, and then they will send a Bitcoin transaction to your on-chain address of choice. And that way, it's a lot cheaper, it's a lot simpler, you don't need to deal with that unilateral exit. And this transaction where you forfeit your VTXOs and you receive an on-chain transaction, that again is handled completely atomically, so you're not dealing with any counterparty risk or anything like that during that process. And then to make all this work, VTXOs have to come with an expiry date, unfortunately. So again, this expiry time is going to vary between different arcs. We're expecting it to be something of like 14 days, 30 days, that kind of order of magnitude. But that means every time you receive a VTXO, like the clock starts ticking, and within that 14 days, let's say 30 days, within that 30 days, you must go back online to refresh those VTXOs. So Ark is really only designed for regular spending if you want to retain the trustless properties. But if, for example, you disappear for a few weeks, you have to go to hospital, whatever, you forget, the Ark, if it's an honest, honorable actor, it's a good Ark, they will refresh your VTXOs for you. But if you're relying on that, you're not getting the same trustless properties, you're having to trust the Ark does that. But there's a lot of incentives for the Ark to refresh your VTXOs, because as soon as an Ark stops refreshing VTXOs, they're going to lose trust with their users, and the users are going to start withdrawing their funds and not making transactions on the Ark. So there's kind of incentives there for the Arks to behave properly. And then if we're going to make a payment within the Ark system, there's two types of payment within Ark. First is in-round payments, and the second is out-of-round payments. which we like to call our core. So, and first one we'll talk about is in-round payments. In-round VTXOs are included. So, as I described earlier, those in-round VTXOs are bundled into a transaction tree and then committed to the Bitcoin blockchain. But that means settlement time can be quite slow, actually. Because if you imagine we have like a 15-minute round time, and there's just been a round, and then a minute later, I try to send a payment to a friend, then I've got to wait 14 minutes for the next round to get my transaction committed before that payment can be settled. So there's a little bit of a delay there. If like there's only 1 minute to the next round, it could be quite fast, but we can't really rely on that to be making our payments. They're also more expensive, and we're going to talk about this in detail in a second, but for every VTXO that I spend, there's a liquidity cost on the Ark side. So the users don't have to deal with liquidity, but the ASP, the Ark does. And there's some costs associated with the capital there, which will inevitably be reflected back to the user as fees. Yeah, because it's committed to so the good thing about these in-round payments is they're trustless, they're totally secure. You don't have to rely on anybody. You don't have to rely on anybody to be able to retrieve those funds on chain. So yeah, these in-round payments are essentially the foundation of Ark. Like Ark wouldn't work without in-round payments, but actually we don't expect most users will be making in-round payments. The majority of payments we expect will be Ark payments. So with Ark VTXOs, Ark payments, they're not included in that round transaction that we described before. Instead, off-chain, we extend the transaction tree. So this was my balance before, my VTXO. Off-chain, we start extending it. And so if I send somebody a transaction, the way that the recipient can be confident that that VTXO is reliable is because the ASP has co-signed that transaction. They're basically guaranteeing that VTXO is good and recoverable through unilateral exit. By handling these out-of-round payments off-chain, we manage to get instant settlement. So we don't have to wait for those round transactions. We just know that payment's delivered immediately. They're also lower cost because they don't come with any liquidity costs for the ASP, so they're going to be cheaper for the users as well. But there's trade-offs. So so in this transaction here, there's two people that signed it. You have the sender that signed the transaction, and then also the ASP that's signed the transaction. So the recipient's like, okay, that's good, as long as the sender and the ASP don't collaborate. So if the ASP is honest, no problem, they can be reassured that this transaction is okay. Or if the sender is honest, then the Ark can't do anything either. It requires two of them to screw the recipient. But another thing to highlight is that Ark payments can be chained. So after one Ark payment, I can use that balance to make another Ark payment. And this person now needs to trust this sender, and then also the ASP. But if the ASP is acting honest, then it doesn't matter what any of these senders do. It's all good. So essentially, there's a lot of trust in both the ASP and the senders there. Yeah, so, and then at any time, so let's say I'm holding one of these Ark VTXOs, at any time, I can choose to cycle that into an in-round transaction. Let's say my balance is getting really high with these Ark transactions, and I'm just feeling a little bit uncomfortable. I can then cycle that into an in-round transaction, pay the fee to achieve that, and then I get all of the assurances of a regular in-round transaction. And another thing we can do when we're spending from an Ark is spend off the Ark. So we can pay to on-chain addresses, we can pay to Lightning invoices, we can pay to other Arks or other entities on the Bitcoin network, eCash mints, custodians, anything. And all of that is handled through Lightning, except for the on-chain addresses, where essentially I just forfeit my VTXO and the ASP makes a payment on-chain for me. And this is a bit of a provocative statement. That's maybe not strictly true, but Ark is Lightning tech, essentially. So Lightning is essential to allow ARCs to be interoperable with the rest of the Bitcoin network. So for example, if I'm trying to make a payment to another user on a different ARC, that would go across Lightning. And when it arrives, the ASP on the other end would convert it into a VTXO. The Lightning payment would convert into a VTXO for them to retain the ARC balance. But then also, Lightning is enabling ARC, but then ARC also enables Lightning. So I talked about developers building applications and building Lightning integrations. It's very challenging and difficult and requires a lot of development time. If you integrate with an ARC provider instead, it makes the whole process a lot simpler because basically the ARC is taking care of all the Lightning stuff and it becomes your gateway to the Lightning network. So it allows application developers and wallet developers to deliver self-custodial Lightning experiences to their users in a lot simpler way because you're essentially just building a one-to-one connection with that ARC server. It's easier in terms of APIs and things like that. And then finally, this one's the hardest one to describe, and I would recommend anybody goes away and actually reads some of our documentation on how liquidity and fees work. But essentially, let's say you've onboarded and you've got your VTXO, there's no liquidity cost involved in that. But as soon as you spend that VTXO, there's a liquidity cost because that initial VTXO has an expiry time. Let's say it's 30 days. And then let's say a day later, I make a payment. For the next 29 days, the ARC, the ASP, has to wait for those funds to unlock for them to be able to access those funds. So they're going to have to float the size of that transaction for 29 days. And there's a capital cost associated with that. So for users, the transaction fees will reflect this, and they'll be incentivized to spend older VTXOs rather than newer VTXOs. And they'll also be incentivized to make ARC payments as well. One good side of ARC, though, is that the liquidity costs are a bit more predictable than Lightning. So if you're an LSP and you're committing funds to users' channels, it's very difficult to know how many transactions that user is going to make in the future. You don't know how many transaction fees you're going to be generating from that user. Whereas with ARC, they make the payment, you know how long it's going to take, that transaction, that VTXO to expire, and you know how long you're going to have to front that cash. So it's a lot easier to predict that liquidity cost, and hopefully that will make things a bit more efficient as well. So what's next? For second, just introduce you guys to it. Expect some news imminently, hopefully very, very soon. One kind of common misconception with ARC is that covenants are required. We don't need covenants on the Bitcoin blockchain. That's already been solved. Covenants would make ARC better, certainly, but we can already achieve a really good version of it now. There are 2 implementations being worked on already. So one is from Ark Labs, and the second one is from Second. So keep an eye on that. You can already test those implementations on things like Reg test networks. The code's available in Ark Labs and our GitHubs. I'd also recommend everybody joins the Ark Telegram community. If you have technical questions, ask in there. My colleagues are in there. They'll be able to answer you. And also news about our company, about Ark Labs, will also be posted in there. And then finally, if there are any developers in the crowd and you're interested in joining a Bitcoin startup or switching to a different Bitcoin startup, we'd love to speak to you. We're especially interested in people that can code with Rust, C++, but we're also looking for a DevOps position, especially if you've got experience running a Lightning node. That'd be cool. So if you're interested, come find me after the talk or send us an email at hello@second.tech. And thank you. I'm not sure if I've been talking for ages. Maybe I don't have time for questions, but happy to answer if you have some.
Yep, we have 5 minutes more for questions. Yep.
Hi, Neil. Great presentation. I think at the start you did mention that ASP will also can also help to settle Lightning invoices on the existing Lightning network today. Is that what you mean, so?
Sorry, could you?
I think you did mention at the start of your presentation that ASPs they are able to settle Lightning invoices on the Lightning network.
So receiving is not possible just now.
Receiving
Sending is okay.
Sending is
Yeah.
possible.
I mean, receiving will be possible. It's just that code has not been written yet, whereas the code to send is there. It's ready.
Got it.
Yeah.
How should I preview the entire Ark? I think you did mention that you are from second, and there's also Ark Labs. So the the protocol is actually like an open source infrastructure that anyone can make use.
Everything we write, everything Ark Labs write, it's all open source. Yeah, we're very dedicated to that. But if you imagine it, it's a little bit like the Lightning space. We have Core Lightning, we have LND. But the thing with the Lightning network is it's especially challenging because they have to be compatible, right? Whereas Arcs technically don't need to be compatible. You could have two Arcs running on completely different implementations, and the interoperability part is handled by Lightning. So it's totally fine for each Arc to fork the code and do their own
Got it.
parameters.
Okay. I have one more question with regards to virtual TSO. So VTSO. So today, if say I have received a VTSO, is that VTSO interoperable with other ASPs?
No. So
It's tied to that
it's
ASP
tied to
right
that,
as
it's tied to that specific Arc. And then if you want to, so you can still send to another Arc, but that needs to be handled through Lightning. So on the sender side, the Arc will atomically swap the VTXO for a Lightning payment. And then on the receiving side, that Arc will also atomically swap. So the person receives an Arc balance.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. If anyone has any question.
Thanks for the presentation. It was very informative. Just a quick question. Do you envisage a future where Arc and Lightning will essentially merge?
I don't know what you mean by merge, but I think the future of Bitcoin scaling is going to be a blended environment. So there's going to be Arcs working with Lightning. I think everything is going to be connected to Lightning. And then you'll have Arc entities, you'll have eCash entities, and they'll all be interacting over Lightning. But I don't know how you would merge the two.
What I mean by merge in terms of people will no longer look at Lightning as a means of payment between individuals, but more as you envisage it as a means to connect different nodes together. So it'd be like the pipe between nodes, where the actual use of it is by Arc. So therefore, essentially, both sides could essentially program or work together as one essential unit?
Yeah, I think that's the goal. We want to make it as seamless as possible. Yeah.
And my last question is: Do you feel that eCash is a competitor to this, or do you think there's just one option?
I think inevitably, right now there's this many Bitcoin users. Inevitably, these different protocols are going to be competing for users, but I think long term they're not competitors; they're just complementary. Like each one strengthens the other. But certainly, at any one point in time, they're going to be there's going to be users moving from Lightning to Arc or Arc to eCash, whatever. But yeah, I'm not too familiar with eCash, but I don't like the idea that it's custodial. So yeah.
Can you explain maybe from a really high level what the differences between your implementations are with Ark Labs implementation?
No. Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah. Yeah. I think both companies started with the same code base. So right now, there's probably not a huge amount of divergence. But yeah, as time goes by, that divergence will become greater and there'll be more specialization. But right now, they're very similar.
So it sounds like Arc at least somewhat depends on Lightning. So would you consider Arc to be a layer 3, or do you consider it a layer 2?
I mean, you can call it what you want. We consider it a layer 2. I mean, okay. That's what the name second's about, second layer, right?
Okay.
Gotcha. But yeah, I would call it a second layer, because you don't need. You could still set up an Arc without Lightning, right?
Okay.
It's just Lightning is required for that interoperability with the broader network.
Gotcha.
Soon. That hopefully should be part of the news. Yeah.
You said the implementation, so the Lightning Network, each implementation core Lightning L&D, they have to be completely compatible, right? But you said Ark, it doesn't have to be this case. But what about developers, for example, if they want to connect with Ark and then they switch to another implementation, doesn't that mean they should be compatible, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think that's a good argument for keeping them relatively compatible. At least their APIs should look very similar, but it just depends on how the market shakes out. Certainly for, like, if you've got a larger implementation, there's an incentive for the smaller implementation to look more like the larger implementation, right? Because that makes it easier for people to switch over. But yeah, I think it's difficult to predict how that will look. Like, there might be certain advantages to having something completely different, or certain specializations. So yeah, but I mean, certainly it would be better if they all looked very similar, for sure.
Cool. And just one more, like you said rounds every few minutes, right? And each time a round happens, there has to be transactions committed on chain. So if the fees are super high, like for example, when the halving happened, right? And the fees were like crazy 1,000 sats per VByte, how does Ark perform in this case?
I think it rides on the expectation that there will be enough transaction volume within the Ark to cover the fees to cover that. And then also in times of high transaction fees, you can probably bump up the fees within the Ark for people to make transactions.
Okay, cool. Thanks.